My name is Jessica Johnson, and I'm a 21-year-old junior at the University of California, Berkeley. I live in a quaint little house with my mom and stepfather, but this story isn't about the picturesque neighborhood or the golden gates of the university. It's about me, my struggles, and the shadows that lurk within my own home. First, let me tell you about myself. I stand at 5'7" with a lean build. I weigh around 130 pounds. I've always been told I have a dancer's physique, although I've never danced professionally. My hair is a cascade of golden blonde that falls just below my shoulders, often tied up in a loose bun when I'm at home or studying. My eyes are a bright blue, like the skies over the San Francisco Bay on a clear day. I wear size 7.5 shoes, which I've always found a bit tricky to shop for, but that's a minor detail in the grand scheme of things. At home, comfort is my priority. You won't catch me in anything too fancy. I usually wear a simple, light blue checkered shirt that's become a bit too large for me, paired with a soft cotton skirt that reaches just above my knees. It's breezy and comfortable, perfect for lounging around or catching up on my reading. On my feet, you'll see me in flip-flops, the kind that give you that relaxed, beachy vibe even if you're just stepping into the kitchen. My days at Berkeley are filled with lectures, labs, and a lot of coffee. I'm majoring in environmental science, which keeps me busy with both fieldwork and research. But when I come home, I try to shed the academic weight off my shoulders and embrace the simplicity of my domestic life. However, not all is serene in this setting. My stepfather, whom I'll call Mark for this narrative, has been a part of my life since I was 15. Over the years, his behavior has shifted from being a distant but polite figure to something more ominous. Today was like any other day until it wasn't. I had returned from a long day at the university, my mind still buzzing with the lecture on climate change impacts. I changed into my home attire, the checkered shirt slightly hanging off one shoulder, and my skirt swaying with each step. I was in the kitchen heating up some leftover pasta when Mark entered. He made some small talk, but there was an edge to his voice that made my skin prickle. He complimented my outfit, but the way he looked at me made my stomach churn. As I moved to leave the kitchen, he blocked my path, his body too close for comfort. "Jessica, you look so grown up these days," he said, his breath too warm on my neck. I stepped back, feeling the counter press against my back. "I need to study, Mark," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But he didn't move. His hand reached out, brushing my arm in a way that was meant to be casual but felt anything but. I ducked under his arm, my heart racing, and hurried towards my room. But Mark followed, his steps heavy on the wooden floor. He caught up near my doorway, his hand on my shoulder this time, firm and insistent. "You're not going to ignore me, are you?" His tone was teasing, but his grip wasn't. I spun around, my voice firm now. "Please, leave me alone." The confrontation escalated. Words were exchanged, heated and sharp. I told him to keep his distance, that I wasn't comfortable with his behavior. He argued back, saying I was misinterpreting, that I was family. But the tightness in my chest said otherwise. I managed to push past him, locking myself in my room, my sanctuary. I could hear him outside, his voice a mix of frustration and something darker. That night I lay awake, the safety of my room feeling less secure. I knew I had to stand my ground, not just for my peace, but for my future. I would need to talk to my mom, maybe involve someone else if this continued. But for now, I was just Jessica, the girl in the oversized shirt and skirt, in flip-flops, facing a challenge that no one should have to in their home. And so, my story continues, with each day at Berkeley a respite, and each night a reminder of the battle I'm fighting in what should be my sanctuary. The next morning, the faint sunlight filtered through the windowsill, casting soft shadows on the walls. In that moment, I wished the previous night had been just a nightmare, a fleeting bad dream. But reality stood firm before me. My heart felt heavy with the weight of what had happened, and no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, the truth lingered in my mind. What was I supposed to do? Mark's behavior had crossed a line, one I couldn't just pretend didn't exist. My mind raced, but the fear in my chest kept me frozen. I wanted to go back to Berkeley, to escape into my lectures, my research, and the comfort of being surrounded by people who had no idea of the storm brewing back at home. The fieldwork, the labs, the constant motion of campus life. It felt like a refuge from the suffocating anxiety that clung to me at home. But I couldn't avoid the problem forever. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mark's face. Every time I took a breath, I felt the remnants of his touch. As I took a break from my studies, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from my mom. "Jessica, we need to talk. Please come home for dinner tonight." I read it twice, trying to process what she was saying. Something about her tone made my heart race. Why would she want to talk now? Why would she bring me into a conversation at this moment? A mixture of dread and curiosity settled in my stomach. I couldn't ignore it, not this time. I knew I needed to face it, no matter how uncomfortable or painful the conversation might be. I stood up, put on my shoes, and walked out of my room. When I arrived at home, I found my mom and Mark sitting at the dinner table, an unsettling silence hanging in the air. The warmth that usually filled our home felt absent. Mark's eyes were cold, his posture stiff as he barely touched his food. He looked at me, but there was something different in his gaze, something that made me uneasy. "Sit down, Jessica," my mom said, her voice softer than usual. "Dinner's ready." But neither of them said anything else. The silence stretched between us, heavier than any words could be. Mark's eyes never left me, but he didn't speak. He simply stared, his gaze piercing and cold, as if he were trying to read me. I could feel the tension thickening in the air, and it was suffocating. I couldn't take the quiet any longer. With a deep breath, I spoke. "Mom, I think we need to talk. About Mark," I said, my voice shaky but determined. The words had been on the tip of my tongue for so long, and now they were out, hanging between us. My mom's face paled. She looked at me as if she hadn't expected me to say it out loud. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. The words started pouring out, one after another. "Mark's behavior. It's been bothering me for a while now. It's not just recently. It's been happening for years, and I've tried to ignore it, but I can't anymore. He makes me feel uncomfortable, Mom, in ways I don't know how to explain. I need you to understand." My mom's expression changed, her eyes widening as realization set in. "Jessica, I've seen it too. I didn't want to believe it, but I've seen the way he looks at you, the way he touches you." She took a shaky breath. "I should have said something earlier. I should have protected you." Tears welled up in her eyes, and for the first time I saw her vulnerability, something I had never seen before. She reached out to take my hand, her grip tight and warm. "I am so sorry. I failed you as a mother." Mark didn't say anything. He didn't apologize. He just sat there as if nothing had happened. But his eyes were cold, and his silence was louder than any words could be. The room felt suffocating, but for the first time, I didn't feel alone. My mom and I were on the same side, facing the same reality. We didn't need Mark to validate our truth. I had spoken up, and I wasn't backing down. "I'm not going to let this go, Mom. I'm not going to let him control me. Not anymore." The words left my lips with a newfound strength, one I didn't know I had. The rest of the evening was quiet, but something had shifted. My mom began to make plans for us to seek help. Therapy, counseling, whatever it took to rebuild the trust and safety that had been broken. Mark wasn't a part of those plans. The days that followed were filled with awkward silence and quiet tension at home, but there was a sense of relief too. My mom and I began to rebuild our relationship, talking more openly than we had in years. She became my ally in ways I never imagined, and together we made sure that Mark understood his place in our lives, distant and irrelevant. When it was time for me to return to Berkeley, I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. But one thing was certain. I wasn't walking back into the house as the same person. I had spoken my truth, and in doing so, I had found a strength within myself that I never knew existed. I wasn't just the girl in the oversized shirt and skirt anymore. I was someone who had fought for herself, for her safety, and for her future. Berkeley became my refuge once more, but this time I returned with a new sense of purpose. I wasn't running away anymore. I was moving forward, taking control of my life, and never allowing anyone to take that from me again. And as I walked through the gates of the university once again, I could finally breathe easy, knowing that I had begun the journey of healing, of reclaiming my voice, and of standing up for the future I deserved. The days that followed were a blur of mixed emotions. Berkeley had always been my escape, but now it felt like I was running away from more than just academic stress. I found solace in my studies, in the trees and open spaces on campus, and in the lectures that made my mind race in a direction far removed from the chaos at home. But the weight of what had happened, what was still happening, lingered. I hadn't seen Mark in a few days, but every time I called home there was a sense of unease in my mom's voice. It wasn't the same warmth I had grown accustomed to. Our conversations became strained. I could tell she was wrestling with her own guilt. She kept apologizing, telling me she would handle things, that she was doing everything she could to make things right. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the man who had once been a stranger to me, who had crossed a line I never thought possible, was still too close. The distance between my mom and I was growing. We were on the same side, but there was an unspoken wall between us, one that neither of us knew how to break down. Weeks passed, and slowly, I began to notice changes. My mom started going out more, not just for errands, but for longer periods of time. Sometimes, she wouldn't come home until late, and when she did, her eyes were tired, like she had been carrying something heavy. She was trying to fix things, trying to heal what had been broken, but it was clear that the cracks ran deeper than I had expected. I had begun to make new friends at Berkeley, and they were a welcome distraction from the turmoil at home. I spent more time in the library than I had before, immersing myself in research and fieldwork. The sun seemed brighter, the days longer, and I was learning to breathe again. My classmates didn't know the extent of what I had been through, but their support, their mere presence, helped me feel less isolated. One evening as I sat at the campus cafe, lost in a research paper, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my mom. "Jessica, I need to talk to you when you get home." The message was short, but the sense of urgency behind it was palpable. I didn't respond right away. I couldn't. Part of me felt like I needed to keep running, to stay away, to not face what was waiting for me back home. But another part of me knew that ignoring it would only make things worse. That night, I returned to the house. The familiar warmth was absent again. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to change. Mom was sitting in the living room when I walked in. She was wearing a sweater I didn't recognize, her eyes red as if she had been crying. Mark wasn't around, which made me feel both relieved and anxious. I could sense something had happened, something that had changed between them, but I wasn't sure I was ready to hear it. "Jessica," my mom started, her voice soft but steady. "I need to apologize again for not protecting you, for not seeing things sooner. But there's more. Something I should have told you a long time ago." My heart skipped a beat. What could she possibly say that would make this situation worse? My mind raced with possibilities, but I knew I had to listen. "I've been seeing a therapist," she said quietly, almost as if saying it out loud made it more real. I didn't know how to handle everything, how to handle my own guilt. But the truth is, I didn't know how deep Mark's problems ran until recently. He's been seeing someone too. I don't think it was just the alcohol or stress. He's been battling his own demons, and I didn't see it. I sat there in silence, the pieces of the puzzle beginning to shift into place. It didn't make what Mark had done right, but it added another layer of complexity to everything. My mom, who had always been my rock, had been blindsided by the man she had chosen to be with. She hadn't seen the warning signs because she had been blinded by her own fears and insecurities. "I'm trying to fix things, Jessica," she said, her voice shaking. "But I know it might not be enough. I understand if you need time or space from me." I felt a lump in my throat. Time. Space. How much time did I need? How much space could we possibly have when the very foundation of our family had been shattered? "I don't know what to say," I finally said, my voice low. "But I need you to understand that I can't pretend nothing happened. I can't just forget." "I know," she replied softly. "I wouldn't ask you to." For the first time in weeks, I felt something like relief. Not everything was fixed, not by a long shot, but we were finally speaking the same language. I wasn't alone in my feelings of betrayal and confusion anymore. My mom was finally seeing the truth. She hadn't been perfect, but neither had I. The next few days were filled with difficult conversations. My mom was doing everything she could to distance herself from Mark, but it wasn't easy. He was still around, still in the house, still lurking in the background. Every time I came home, I felt like I was walking into a battlefield. The tension was palpable, and I knew the peace I was hoping for wouldn't come until Mark was gone for good. One night, when I returned to the house after a long day of fieldwork, Mark wasn't there. I noticed my mom was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the phone in front of her. "He's gone," she said quietly when she saw me. "He left. I told him I couldn't do this anymore." Relief mixed with sadness washed over me. My mom had made a decision, one that was as hard as it was necessary. Mark was no longer a part of our lives, and while that didn't undo everything that had happened, it was a step forward. As I lay in bed that night, I thought about all that had transpired. The long, hard conversations, the tears, the guilt, the healing. It was all part of a process I wasn't sure I was ready for. But as the darkness settled around me, I realized one thing. I was finally free. Free from the weight of the past. Free from the man who had once claimed to be a part of my life. Free to find my own way forward. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, I could breathe deeply without fear. The road ahead was mine to walk, and I was no longer afraid to take the first step.